My name is Isla Warren. I'm 52 years old, a retired colonel in the United States Air Force. I spent half my life in the sky, piloting jets faster than sound. But 3 years ago, I disappeared from every radar, including my family's. Now I mop floors on military aircraft I used to fly. And that irony? My sister wears it like perfume. Now you're a janitor, Elena laughed, loudly, deliberately, loud enough for the 4-star general seated 2 rows up to turn his head. I said nothing, just tightened the strap on my helmet and kept checking the underbelly hatch for structural fatigue. That was my job now, mechanical safety inspection before takeoff. The sky had once saluted me. Today I was invisible on my knees. Elena strutted past in heels, brushing her glossy hair behind her ear. She made sure the others saw her laughing. What they didn't see was the aircraft, the C-17 Globemaster, vibrating slightly off rhythm. Something in the right nacelle felt wrong. Not enough to ground the plane, but enough to make my stomach shift. They called boarding. The cargo hold filled with soldiers, 250 of them, some half my age, some barely out of boot camp. I moved back into my seat near the maintenance deck, unseen behind the crew curtain. The jet lifted off, punching through cloud layers until we stabilized at 35,000 feet. I leaned back, eyes closed, trying to ignore the mechanical drone that once used to be music to my ears. Then the engine roared twice and stopped. Silence. Heavy and thick. The kind of silence only pilots truly fear. And then the alarms began. Both engines. Both. Inside the cockpit, I could imagine the chaos. But I didn't have to imagine for long. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, tight, urgent. Emergency protocol. Get Phoenix from the maintenance crew, now. Every head turned. Elena's eyes widened. Who's Phoenix? The 4-star general stood, calm but focused. That's her, he said, pointing at me. Get Colonel Warren to the flight deck. Elena's face dropped like she'd seen a ghost. I stood slowly, peeled off the maintenance vest, and stepped through the cabin as heads turned, whispers rising like smoke. Soldiers moved aside. The general nodded once. I entered the cockpit. Ryan, the captain, looked like he hadn't aged a day since the first time I trained him. Colonel, he said, voice tight with adrenaline. I never thought I'd say this, but I need you to land her. His eyes were trembling. I took the seat, adjusted the controls, ran my hands over the dash like greeting an old friend. I inhaled. My pulse matched the cockpit's warning rhythm. This wasn't new to me. This was home. As my hands moved across the control panel, the cockpit melted away. Just for a second, I wasn't on a failing C-17 in the middle of the Atlantic. I was back in a gray F-15 a decade ago. Under enemy fire, losing altitude, one wing clipped. Flames licking at the horizon. My wingman Callie was screaming in my earpiece. She'd taken a hit. We were alone, outnumbered, and I was bleeding from a shard of glass across my cheek. Phoenix Command had whispered in my headset, "Bring her home." I brought her home, but she never walked again. That was the last time anyone called me by my call sign. After the Senate hearings, after the political fallout, they erased Phoenix from the logs. No parade, no press, no closure, just silence, until today. Ryan was pale but steady beside me. "Do you still remember how to do this?" he asked, eyes scanning the horizon for land. I cracked my neck, stared down the windshield like it owed me money, and said, "I only forgot what fear feels like." He chuckled under his breath, just for a second, and nodded. That was all the clearance I needed. I checked fuel status. One tank had ruptured. We had 27 minutes of controlled glide, no engine thrust. The nose needed to stay balanced. Too high, we'd stall. Too low, we'd fall like a stone. A beat passed, then another. I pressed the emergency beacon. We'd try for Lajes Field on the Azores. A narrow runway hugging the ocean, like a hand barely catching a falling plate. Outside, we descended gently. The cabin behind us was silent. Every soldier knew something was wrong. I could hear Elena's voice, muffled behind the door, arguing with a flight attendant. She wasn't used to not being the center of control. But this cockpit, this was my kingdom. Ryan tapped the side display. "We might get one engine back. Maybe." I narrowed my eyes and pulled gently left. Let the machine know I was here. As the plane banked toward the horizon, Ryan said softly, "You know, when I was a cadet, and they said you vanished after the hearings, I didn't believe it. I knew Phoenix wouldn't disappear." I didn't reply. Some things don't need answering. Instead, I whispered to myself, "This time, I bring them all home." I could feel 250 souls behind me, and one shattered name in front of me, ready to rise again. 3 years ago, I was Colonel Isla Warren of the United States Air Force. I held 2 distinguished flying crosses, 3 meritorious service medals, and the Air Medal with Valor device. My call sign was Phoenix. I'd flown F-15s across continents, survived 3 crash landings, and once guided a blind pilot back to base using Morse code and a flashlight. And then I vanished. It didn't happen all at once. It began with a technical report, one I didn't write, a mechanical systems failure on a test aircraft during a live demo over Nevada. No casualties, but the Pentagon was furious. The report said I'd signed off on faulty components. I hadn't. But someone had forged my authorization. I filed a formal dispute. I requested an internal audit. I even submitted my flight logs and notes. But the report had already been reviewed by Congress. The hearings were closed to the public. Everything was redacted. They said I'd made a grave error in judgment. I was offered a quiet retirement with honor, as long as I didn't push back. I took the honorable route. At least that's what I told myself. In truth, I was silenced. That's how I became invisible. I couldn't sleep the week after I left the Air Force. I still woke up at 0400. I still shaved seconds off my routines. I still ironed my shirts like I was reporting to a briefing. But the uniform was gone, the nameplate taken off the door. The salute that once met me on every base, gone. It was a friend from my academy days who got me a contract job with Lancer Aerotech, a defense firm that serviced military aircraft out of Dover. They didn't care who I used to be. They needed someone who could crawl under a C-17 wing and spot a fuel leak in the dark. I was overqualified, overtrained, and over it, I swept hangars. Repaired cables, filed safety reports no one read. They listed me under maintenance crew, no title, no rank. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. During my weekly inventory run, I saw her name on a visitor log, Isla Warren, CEO of Polaris Tactical Systems. My older sister. Elena was always brilliant, ambitious, impossible to pin down. She never went into service like I did. Instead, she became a defense contractor, charming lawmakers, building drones, selling innovation. She once said, "Let the war fighters get the glory. I'll make the future they die in." At the time, I thought she was joking. Turns out she wasn't. Because when I dug deeper, purely out of instinct, I found something that stopped me cold. The technical report that ended my career. It had originated from a Polaris-affiliated lab. The signature author listed? An analyst who used to intern under Elena during her MIT fellowship. And the timing? 3 days before her company secured a $1.2 billion drone surveillance contract from the Department of Defense. The same one I'd testified against in a closed security briefing. I was never meant to see that contract again, or fly, or speak. I wasn't just erased, I was sacrificed. And I knew exactly who sharpened the knife. But revenge isn't served through shouting. Not when the person who buried you stands on a stage built from your silence. So I kept working, I kept learning, and I waited. Waited for the moment the sky would remember Phoenix. And on that flight, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, it did. But Elena had no idea what was coming. I accepted the maintenance position without hesitation. The job title was simple, C-17 airframe technician. The pay was average, the hours were long. The respect, non-existent, perfect. Invisibility was exactly what I needed. They thought I'd fallen, that I'd faded into the background, humbled and broken. What they didn't understand was that for someone like me, obscurity was armor, humiliation was camouflage. Let them laugh. The truth is, there's power in being underestimated. You can listen without being heard, watch without being watched, learn every inch of a machine until you know it better than its blueprints. The first time I walked back into a C-17, I ran my hand along the inner fuselage, like greeting a long-lost friend. I knew every bolt by feel, every creak, every vibration, every sound that didn't belong. The young techs ignored me. They thought I was just another lifer too old to do anything else. They had no idea who I used to be. Every day I logged anomalies. I fixed stabilizers, replaced fuses, tuned emergency systems, but most of all, I watched. Watched what equipment passed through Lancer Aerotech's hangars. Watched who visited, what names signed inspection clearances, what brands were stamped on prototype parts. Polaris Tactical Systems was everywhere. Their logos marked black flight recorders. Their wiring diagrams slipped into upgraded comms panels. Their AI-assisted guidance chips, the ones I warned against, were being tested right under my nose. But none of it was illegal. Elena was too smart for that. No, she didn't break the law. She bent it, designed it, owned it. So I stayed quiet. I played the part. I wore the patch that said maintenance. No rank, no title. But I kept a small emblem inside my locker, a scorched metal tag with one word etched in it. Phoenix. It had been given to me after that mission over the Mediterranean, when Callie lost her legs and I nearly lost my life. They said I rose from the fire and carried the mission through. They said the name fit. Now, no one used it. Not even me. But I never forgot it. Each time I opened that locker, I'd touch the edge of that tag, feel its jagged burn, and I'd remember who I was, what they took, and what was still mine. Phoenix wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Some nights, I'd walk the runway after closing hours, letting the cold air bite at my face. I'd look up at the stars and trace flight patterns in my mind, calculating altitudes, descent angles, wind shears. My hands would twitch, missing the weight of the yoke. They grounded me, but my instincts were still airborne. They stripped my wings, but they didn't clip them. And every time I looked up into the dark sky, I whispered to myself, one day, I'll use these wings in a way they never saw coming. I didn't need revenge, not then. What I needed was clarity, distance, stillness, and a chance. Because people like Elena, they never stop climbing. They don't believe the past can catch them. But fire always rises. The only question was when, and how high I'd be flying when it did. The manifest came across my desk at 0430. C-17 Globemaster. Departure. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Destination, Dover, Delaware. On board 250 American soldiers, recently rotated out from deployment. Special guests, General Thomas Howard and Isla Warren, CEO of Polaris Tactical Systems. My breath caught for half a second. Elena. It had been 3 years. No phone calls, no holidays, no apologies. Only one message the day after my retirement became public. I hope this gives you peace. Peace. Now she was on my flight. Not as family, not even as a face from the past, but as a figure of power, flanked by security and status. The same woman who orchestrated the erasure of my name was now boarding a plane I had cleared for flight. Officially, I was listed as part of the air maintenance crew, riding along for in-flight systems diagnostics. It was common procedure, but no one looked twice at us. Not the soldiers, not the officials, not even the pilots. No one ever asked the janitor to smile for a photo. As the engines whirred to life and the massive bird began taxiing, I sat quietly near the equipment bay. Standard jumpsuit, no insignia, just a clipboard and a patch with the word tech on my chest. I saw her enter through the forward ramp. Flawless, as always. Hair straight, tailored blazer, eyes like polished glass. Elena moved with the assurance of someone who thought gravity was optional. She shook hands with a few officers, nodded respectfully at General Howard, and took the first seat in the row closest to the cockpit. I stayed still, watching from the shadows, until I heard her voice, loud, sharp, performative. "Oh my God, is that my sister?" she said, with a dry laugh. "Well, would you look at that? From fighter pilot to janitor." The word echoed across the deck like gunfire. I didn't flinch, not visibly. General Howard turned to glance at me. I stood upright, met his eyes for one breath, and gave a tight nod. He blinked, hesitated, but said nothing. Elena continued. She always did like to fix broken things, she chuckled. Guess this suits her. No decisions to make. No one's life in her hands anymore. Several nearby soldiers shifted in discomfort. One sergeant tried to change the subject, but Elena wasn't finished. She leaned in toward the general and whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. She used to fly for this country. Now she cleans its toilets. The general said nothing, but he did look at me again. Longer this time. He studied my face, like a man seeing a blueprint he vaguely remembered. I simply held his gaze. No emotion, no reaction, just steel. Because this was what Elena never understood. You don't destroy a pilot by grounding them. You don't erase a warrior by changing their uniform. She thought she'd taken my voice, but silence can echo louder than screams. I returned to my checklist and marked off the cabin pressurization values. Hands steady, breathing slow. Elena turned away, satisfied with the damage she thought she'd done. But I wasn't broken, because I knew something she didn't. That sky, that bird, that mission. It wasn't done with me yet, and the moment she'd carved out for humiliation was about to become the moment I returned to the cockpit. 30 minutes after takeoff, we crossed the coast of Ireland, banking slightly to correct for a strong jet stream. The C-17 was holding steady, but something in the air felt wrong. You learn to feel it after years of flying. The way turbulence comes in rhythmic pulses rather than random bumps. The subtle sway of the wings. The shift in cabin pressure that happens half a beat too slow. I sat near the aft maintenance station, watching the sensor feed from the flight systems. My eyes narrowed as I noticed a tremor in the RPM readings on engine 2. Not drastic, but inconsistent. A vibration. I unclipped my headset and walked toward the right side of the aircraft, pretending to secure loose paneling. As I leaned close to the bulkhead, I felt it again. Something off in the resonance. Subtle, but wrong. It wasn't just the weather. Something was happening with the engine's turbine spool. I flagged it with a red tag on my clipboard and made my way to the flight deck, knocking gently on the door. The first officer cracked it open. Everything all right back there? There's a vibration coming off engine 2. Slight frequency shift in the oscillations, I said. Might be nothing, but we should keep an eye on it. The pilot leaned over his console. No alerts in the system. I know, I replied calmly. But sometimes systems lag. It's just a hunch. He gave me a tight smile. Appreciate it, but we've flown this bird 3 times this week. She's solid. I gave a respectful nod and stepped back. It wasn't my cockpit anymore. Back at my seat, I secured my gear, just in case. I'd learned long ago that it's not paranoia if your instincts are built on 30 years of experience. Outside, the sky was beginning to change. Darker clouds crept over the horizon, folding into themselves like a brewing storm. Wind vectors shifted. A cold draft slithered through the cabin despite pressure control. Across the aisle, a young soldier, no more than 20, looked out the window and whistled. That looks nasty, he muttered. I nodded. Could be a squall line forming. He glanced at my name tag. Warren, you Air Force? Used to be, I said, keeping my voice neutral. His eyes widened. Whoa. You ever fly one of these? He gestured upward. I smiled softly. This one? Not exactly. But I spent a lot of years flying something faster. He perked up. Like what? F-15s? My smile deepened. Long time ago. Another soldier leaned in. No way. You were a fighter pilot? Just a job, I shrugged. One I loved. That word, loved, stung more than I meant it to. Must have had a call sign, the first kid grinned. Everyone's got one. What was yours? I paused, just for a beat too long. Then I said, doesn't matter anymore, because that was the point, wasn't it? I wasn't her anymore. Not the phoenix who once pulled a blackout dive from 40,000 feet to rescue a downed squad. Not the one who navigated a disabled jet through sandstorm vectors with one working eye. Not the one who used to feel most alive above enemy territory. Now I was the woman tightening bolts under fluorescent lights. The sister used as a punchline in front of a general. But I could feel it again, something coming. That quiet sense in the pit of your gut before it all goes sideways. The plane rattled gently, too gently, like something just let go. And far ahead, I heard the faintest click through the cabin walls, a warning whisper from the sky. The sound came like a knife through the cabin. First one engine coughed, just once, then again, longer, grinding. Then silence. The other followed within seconds. The sudden absence of noise was more terrifying than any explosion. You don't realize how much comfort there is in the hum of working engines until they go silent. Then came the shriek, a blaring, unmistakable sound, the master warning alarm. My hands froze mid-adjustment on the panel I had been inspecting. I knew that tone. I'd trained for it, I'd lived it. But on a commercial military flight with 250 troops aboard, it shouldn't have been possible. From the flight deck, chaos exploded. Engine 1 failure, confirmed. Engine 2, no response. We've lost both. Screams from the forward cabin. Soldiers unbuckling instinctively, despite the fastened seatbelt sign flashing red. Elena shot up from her seat like a switchblade snapping open. Her voice sharpened. What's happening? Is this turbulence? No one answered her, because the next thing we all heard was my name. Not Isla, not Warren, but the one they buried with my wings 3 years ago. Get Phoenix from the maintenance crew, Ryan's voice barked over the intercom. Now! Every muscle in my body went cold. I stood without a word. The young soldier beside me just stared. I dropped my tools, unclipped the emergency override pass from my belt, and moved forward, fast. Elena grabbed my arm. What the hell is going on? What is he talking about? Before I could answer, a deep voice cut across us. General Howard, seated near the front, turned in his jump seat. He looked straight at Elena. She's Phoenix, he said. Your sister. Elena blinked like she'd just heard a foreign language. What? Colonel Isla Warren, fighter pilot. The one whose reputation your company dragged through congressional mud. I didn't wait for her to respond. I pushed past the curtain and entered the cockpit. Ryan stood from the captain's seat, wide-eyed. Thank God I met his gaze. Status: no thrust, dual flameout. Hydraulics intact, for now. Avionics stable, but we've got no power assist on descent. I took the left seat. My fingers hovered over the throttles, not to move them, but to feel them. The way an old pianist touches ivory after years away. I glanced at Ryan again. Altitude? 35,000. We've got glide, but not forever. I adjusted the trim manually and scanned the flight profile. Nearest runway? Closest one with length for a C-17's at Ramstein, Germany. 29er left. Too far. We'll have to try the NATO base in Belgium. Shorter strip, but it's reachable. Barely. He nodded, already radioing to reroute. In my periphery, I could see one of the co-pilots silently recording everything. Protocol, I guessed. I didn't care. What mattered was the aircraft, the crew, the souls in the back. As I gripped the yoke and set angle of attack for emergency descent, I heard the soldiers behind the cockpit whispering. One of them said, "Is she really Phoenix?" And another replied, "She's flying the plane, isn't she?" That was enough. Outside, the clouds churned into a rolling wall of gray. Inside, I took my first steady breath. I wasn't supposed to be here, but maybe that's what being a Phoenix meant. You don't ask to rise, you burn first. The captain's seat wasn't mine anymore, and yet, when Ryan stood, it was as if it had never belonged to anyone else. No hesitation, no second thoughts. He stepped aside with the kind of trust you only find in a war zone. "You've got it," he said. I nodded once and slid into the left seat, just like I had thousands of times before. My hands moved before my brain caught up. It wasn't instinct. It was memory, muscle deep. I glanced at Ryan. "You remember the typhoon storm off the Okinawa coast?" His lip twitched, just barely. "I would have died in that sky if not for you." Flashback, 3-second hit. We were in separate F-15s, visibility near zero, radio static deafening. He was only a cadet. I was his flight lead. His compass had spun out mid-storm. I remember his voice on the comms, young, terrified. "Ma'am, I've got nothing. I'm lost." I flew low, looped back through lightning like threading a needle, and positioned my jet under his. I became his compass. I said just 6 words. "Stay with me. I'll get you home." And I did. Now, years later, he was doing the same for me. Ryan stood behind the chair, my chair, and waited for me to bring another crew home. Back to the present. Throttle's dead, APU's offline, I muttered. Switching to battery backup. Let's check bleed airlines. Manual override. Ryan moved fast, efficient. Not a trainee anymore. I scanned the instruments. Altimeter ticking down, 32,000 and dropping. Glide slope within parameters, but not for long. Hydraulic pressure's holding, Ryan confirmed. Primary pumps are off. I'm rerouting to emergency ram air turbine. I nodded. I'll buy us glide time. You prep the crew. He didn't argue. He vanished through the cockpit door. Just me now. I took a breath and dropped into rhythm. Checklist. Complete. Flap settings. Adjusted. Landing gear. Locked for emergency deployment. Then, I stared at the cold, lifeless engine monitors. Come on, I whispered. I just need one. Switching to alternate ignition. I thumbed the start cycle for engine 1. Seconds dragged like rope through tar. I reached over and tapped the cold steel next to the throttle. Just one breath, I murmured. The turbine whirred faintly, then stuttered. Nothing. Then again, faint spark. A cough. I adjusted the fuel mixture, nudged the bleed air. Every second mattered. Every breath in the cockpit was thick with calculation. And then, I heard it. A slow, throaty rumble, like an animal waking up. Engine 1, alive, just barely, but enough. The cockpit lights shifted as auxiliary power surged back through the systems. The instruments lit like a Christmas miracle. Partial thrust available. I gripped the yoke tighter, my voice low, steady. Phoenix to all crew, Engine 1 coming back online, recalculating glide and thrust trajectory now. Behind me, someone gasped. I didn't turn to see who. I had a plane to land, and 250 people depending on me. I rechecked airspeed, trimmed the pitch, adjusted vertical descent rate. We weren't out of the woods, but we'd just seen the first flame, just like a phoenix, rise from one spark, and carry fire back through the dark. Leges Field, I said, eyes locked on the navigation display. Azores, it's our only shot. The co-pilot blinked. That's on the islands? Yes, I replied, steady. U.S. Air Base. It's got a long enough strip and the backup crews to handle a hard landing. I keyed the radio. Phoenix to control, declaring emergency. Request vector to Leges Field. 1 engine operational. Fuel low. Souls on board. 256. The controller came back in seconds. Calm, professional. Copy, Phoenix. Heading 078. You are clear to descend. My left hand adjusted the yoke. My right nudged the single surviving throttle forward. The engine was wheezing, not quite healthy, not quite failing. I could work with that. Altitude, 28,000 and falling. Glide ratio, tight but viable. Distance, 400 miles. Barely within range. We're riding the edge, I muttered. The cockpit fell into a focused silence. Even the constant buzzing of warning indicators had been muted, overridden. I glanced at the weather map. My stomach clenched. Wind, 27 knots from the north. Crosswind landing, of course. I switched the display to landing pattern approach. Leges Field was nestled near cliffs and sea. Beautiful in peacetime, terrifying when you had one engine and no second chance. I briefed the crew quickly through the intercom. We're making an emergency approach. You will feel a sharp drop, followed by low-level banking. Brace positions will be called on final. Then I said one last thing. I've flown worse skies and walked away. You will too. Back to controls, I began trimming the rudder. With a crosswind like that, I'd need a side-slip landing, nose angled against the wind. Main gear aligned with the runway. I could feel the old instincts waking up. The plane pitched, sudden. The rudder fought me. Easy, I whispered. I nudged the yoke, feathered the flaps, began slowing our descent. The goal wasn't just to land, but to land without breaking in half. My breathing matched the rhythm of the instruments. My eyes never left the horizon. At 9,000 feet, we spotted land. The Azores, a green blur in the ocean, closer. The runway was visible now, a dark ribbon carved into windswept cliffs. I tapped the altimeter. 4,000 feet. Gear down. The hydraulic systems groaned, but the wheels extended, uneven but locked. Speed, 175 knots. A little hot. I'd need to bleed it before touchdown. I eased into a controlled side slip. One wing dipped slightly into the wind. The nose angled against it. It was textbook. At least it should have been. Suddenly, turbulence. The plane bucked once, twice, like a bull throwing its rider. "Come on," I hissed. I countered with opposite rudder, added pressure to the ailerons, recalibrated my line. We were lined up, and falling fast. "Brace, brace," I said through the mic. 200 feet. I adjusted pitch, flared just enough to soften the descent. 150. Now. The main gear struck hard. The aircraft bounced slightly, but I held the nose up, stabilized, let it settle. Nose gear touched. We were on the ground. Reverse thrust engaged. Spoilers deployed. The aircraft groaned, vibrated, but it rolled true. We slowed more. Came to a stop. Silence. Then, applause. Shouting. Soldiers cheering. But I sat still, hands on the yoke, shoulders finally slumping. Not in relief, in memory. My mentor's voice echoed, years ago after my first night landing. "You're not a real pilot until you've brought them home on fire and steel." Now I was, and I had. The aircraft had stopped, wheels locked on the tarmac at Lajes Field. The sound of reverse thrust faded, and for one brief moment, there was no noise, just a charged, suspended silence. Then the cabin erupted. Applause broke out from the soldiers in the back, cheers bouncing off the metal walls. Some laughed, some wept, but mostly it was disbelief. Raw, unfiltered relief. I heard fists pounding the seatbacks, boots stomping the floor, voices shouting into the overheads. "We're down." "She did it." "We're alive," the co-pilot glanced at me with wide, stunned eyes. Ryan gave a single nod behind me. The flight engineer murmured something under his breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe just my call sign. Phoenix. I slowly took my hands off the yoke. My fingers trembled, just slightly. I hadn't realized I'd been gripping it hard enough to numb my palms. My legs, stiff from holding tension during the glide, almost gave as I rose, but I had something to do first. I stepped out of the cockpit, down the narrow aisle, past the shell-shocked crew, toward the back. The cargo bay had already been opened. Fresh Atlantic air spilled inside. A soldier, young, maybe 20, met me halfway. His eyes were glassy, his buzz cut flattened by sweat, and he looked like he wasn't quite sure this was real yet. "You're the tech, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Technically, yeah," he hesitated. Back in the States, at briefing, I asked if pilots still flew with gut, not just gauges. "You remember what you said?" "I said I still trust my gut when there's no time to think," I replied. He swallowed. "And I asked if you'd fly us home safe." I nodded again, quieter now. He stepped forward and took off his unit patch, pressed it into my hand. "You kept your word." And that was it. Not ceremony, not salute. Just that. A quiet gesture from a soldier who now knew what a promise looked like at 35,000 feet. I closed my fingers around the patch. Behind him, more soldiers filtered down the ramp, blinking into the sunlight. Their boots thudded softly as they formed up into loose lines. Some shook hands with the crew. Some called home. A few knelt on the tarmac, pressing their palms into the concrete, as if needing to touch the earth to believe it. That's when I saw her. Elena. She hadn't moved from her seat by the front of the aircraft. Her tailored jacket was wrinkled, her hair mussed from turbulence. Her eyes, usually so sharp and composed, were wide, unfocused. She looked at me like I was someone else, like a ghost she'd buried 3 years ago and never expected to see walking through smoke and triumph. A general approached her, Howard. I caught only the edge of his voice, something like, "That's your sister?" And her nod, mechanical. I approached slowly. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. For once, Elena, the sharpest tongue in any room, was silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Instead, I stood beside her, calm and composed, and simply said, "Maintenance crews don't usually get cockpit access, unless someone calls for Phoenix." Her lips parted again, but I turned before she could respond. Let her sit with that. Behind me, I could hear another round of cheers as rescue teams and ground staff swarmed the aircraft. Protocols kicked in. Debriefs were arranged. Reports would be filed. But none of it mattered in this moment. Because I had kept a promise, because I had returned. Not as a pilot, not as a tech, not even as a sister, but as Phoenix. And everyone aboard that plane knew what that meant now. The moment the wheels kissed the tarmac, I knew the silence wouldn't last. I wasn't wrong. By the time we taxied to a stop, reporters were already broadcasting the emergency landing across every major network. Female janitor saves 250 soldiers midair, one Chiron read. Another asked, "Who is Phoenix?" They didn't know me yet, but by morning they would. Footage of me stepping out of the cockpit, grease-smeared uniform, helmet under my arm, went viral. Cameras caught my sister Elena in the background, frozen mid-sneer. It didn't take long for the dots to connect. The woman she mocked as a janitor was a former decorated fighter pilot. The question started immediately. Why was a colonel doing aircraft maintenance? Was she demoted for misconduct? Is this redemption or cover-up? I didn't answer any of them. Not then. Inside the base, I kept my head down. But even among the crews, whispers flew. Some shook my hand. Others watched from afar, like they didn't know whether to salute or stay silent. Later that day, a young mechanic approached me during debrief. "I read about you, ma'am," he said. Awkward but sincere. "You flew cover for my uncle's convoy in Kandahar. He always talked about a pilot they called Phoenix. Said you saved them when the air support fell short." I nodded, unsure what to say. That night, while most slept, I stayed by the hangar, cleaning my tools like nothing had changed. But everything had. Emails started flooding in. Some from soldiers I'd flown with years ago. One simply read, "Still flying high, I see." But the noise wasn't all praise. An op-ed surfaced on military channels titled, "Is Hero Worship Hiding a History of Recklessness?" The author cited the inquiry that led to my forced retirement. The fake logs. The rumors Elena had seeded years ago were sprouting again. Then came the worst part. Elena went on national television, poised, professional, perfectly rehearsed. She looked straight into the camera and said, "I love my sister, but command isn't just about flying, it's about judgment. And sometimes, those closest to danger lose perspective." When asked about the falsified records, she deflected. "I can't speak to that," she said smoothly. But I trust the system acted with integrity. She had learned well how to poison without using venom. The public split. Some called me a scapegoat. Others called me a liability turned lucky. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Then, out of nowhere, a call came through. I was summoned to a meeting at Joint Command. Not a reprimand, an evaluation. The base commander greeted me personally. Alongside him stood a Pentagon rep in civilian clothes. He didn't introduce himself by title, just handed me a folder. "Colonel Warren," he said, "we've reviewed your case. You were set up, and you deserve to know who did it." Inside the folder were internal memos, audit reports, email trails, all pointing to Elena's department. Falsified parts data, fabricated failure reports. Every signature she had denied, now exposed. He looked me square in the eyes. "You won't be reinstated, but your name will be cleared. Officially, publicly." I couldn't speak. I just breathed. On my way out, I passed a hallway mirror. For the first time in years, I saw myself. Not the ghost of a pilot, not a janitor in coveralls, but the woman who never stopped flying even after they clipped her wings. The next morning, a new headline ran. "Phoenix rises. Ex-colonel cleared of all charges." I didn't need to say a word. Elena did that for me. And the world finally listened. 3 days after the landing, my phone buzzed at 0400. An unfamiliar number flashed. I let it ring once more before answering. "Colonel Warren," the voice said, calm but authoritative. "This is General Howard. I need to see you." The line went silent. No explanation, no room for questions. By 0700, I was in a plain conference room on base. The walls were bare. The air felt heavier than usual. General Howard sat at the head of a narrow table, flanked by 2 uniformed officers I didn't recognize. A civilian in a gray suit stood by the corner, holding a thick folder. Howard didn't offer pleasantries. "Sit, Colonel." I obeyed. He slid a stack of papers toward me. I scanned the first page. It was a request form, official letterhead. Title: Independent Review of Former Officer Discharge Proceedings. My name sat bolded at the top. Why now? I asked, voice even. Because the world saw what you did, he replied. And because I believe you were never supposed to be on the ground. The civilian spoke next. I'm Robert Langley, Department of Defense Oversight Committee. He pulled out another document, my original discharge report. Highlighted sections glared at me, words like procedural misconduct, classified materials breach, failure of judgment. The same lies I'd read 3 years ago, now presented like a reopened wound. Langley tapped the page with a pen. We believe this report was doctored. I said nothing. He continued. We have credible whistleblower testimony that a third-party defense contractor may have influenced your removal. My throat tightened. I already knew where this was going, but hearing it aloud made it harder to bear. Isla Warren, I asked, already knowing the answer. Howard leaned forward. We've uncovered internal communications between her company and an internal Air Force review panel. Financial kickbacks. Fabricated maintenance reports. Your name was flagged as a threat. Too precise, too clean, too unwilling to play ball. I clenched my jaw. Howard looked at me, slower now. We want you to submit a full affidavit. Everything you remember about the week of your suspension, every interaction, every document you were denied access to. My palms grew hot. I nodded once. The next days blurred into a storm of interviews, paperwork, and sealed envelope briefings. I was escorted in and out of rooms like a ghost who'd come back from the dead. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for oxygen. For the first time in years, I was breathing air that didn't reek of someone else's lies. The media buzzed. Whispers of a reopened case. Rumors of a high-profile cover-up involving a major defense firm. And then the hammer dropped. Elena was called to testify before the committee. No cameras were allowed inside, but transcripts leaked. When asked about the falsified reports, she paused for 22 seconds before answering. I defer to my legal counsel. The damage was done. I watched the footage from my bunk, not with satisfaction, but with gravity. A woman who once stood atop marble floors in Pentagon conference rooms was now shrinking under fluorescent lights and subpoenaed silence. The next morning, I received a plain manila envelope at my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, unsigned, with one sentence. They never expected Phoenix to rise again. No name, no return address. But I smiled. Not because I had won, because I had endured. And now, for the first time, the truth wasn't just mine to carry, it was theirs to face. The chamber was smaller than I imagined. A narrow room, sterile lighting, gray walls. No flags, no ceremony, just truth. Bare, uncomfortable, and overdue. I sat 2 rows back. Not as a witness, not yet. Today wasn't about me. It was about Elena. She stood at the front, not in her tailored suits, but a subdued black blazer, hair pinned back. Her face was pale, thinner than before. The kind of fatigue that comes not from lost sleep, but from a crumbling defense built on secrets. The chairman adjusted his mic. Ms. Warren, we've reviewed your company's correspondence with several procurement boards. It appears these communications directly correlate with the false discharge of Colonel Isla Warren. Would you care to explain? Elena didn't blink. She opened a folder, placed a trembling hand on the desk. Yes, I'll speak. A murmur passed through the room. My company, Warren Dynamics, was under immense pressure during that fiscal quarter. We were in danger of losing a $600 million contract due to discrepancies in several maintenance protocols exposed by my sister, Colonel Isla Warren. I inhaled sharply. Not because it was new to me, but because she was saying it, out loud, under oath. Elena continued, voice cracking slightly. There was a meeting, not in a boardroom, in a hotel, off base. Representatives from the subcontractor threatened to pull out unless the report was neutralized. I was told my sister was a liability, too precise, too honest, that if I didn't cooperate, the deal would collapse. My position would be revoked. My husband's company would lose funding, and they would leak sensitive information about my son's medical records. That last line hit harder than I expected. She paused, then added, so I signed off. I allowed the falsification. I told myself I was protecting more than profit. I told myself I was protecting my family. Someone coughed near the exit. No one else moved. She lifted her gaze, and I was wrong. The room held its breath. I betrayed the Air Force. I betrayed my sister. I betrayed the oath we were both raised to honor. I felt something shift inside me, not satisfaction, not anger. Something quieter, something closer to sorrow. The chairman nodded slowly. We will review your full testimony. Be advised that charges of obstruction and conspiracy are being prepared. Elena nodded, no resistance, no denial. As the session adjourned, reporters outside clashed against glass doors like seagulls against a storm window. But inside, it was still. Almost reverent. She walked past me, eyes meeting mine, just for a second. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. I nodded once, not to excuse her, not to absolve her, but to acknowledge that truth, however late, still matters. Outside, the sky was overcast, the same gray as the walls inside, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying this alone. She had lied, and now she had spoken. Later that evening, my inbox received a new message. Subcommittee vote. Unanimous recommendation for reinstatement. There were no exclamation marks, no fanfare, but I smiled. Because the wind was changing. And this time, I wasn't flying alone. The hallway outside the hearing room was lined with silent doors and flickering exit signs. It smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The kind of place where decisions are made in whispers. Where lives are redirected not by shouting, but by what's left unsaid. I waited. I knew she'd come, and she did. Elena stepped out of the committee room, heels muted on the linoleum, face unreadable. She walked past a news crew without a glance, through a door marked authorized personnel only, and into the hallway where I stood. We didn't hug, we didn't shake hands, we just stood there. Two women, two sisters, wearing the same last name but separated by years of silence and one colossal betrayal. I read the subcommittee's vote, she said. You're being reinstated. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't been crying, but you could tell she wanted to. Or had already, when no one was watching. I nodded. They're reviewing the discharge. Said it should have never happened. Elena lowered her gaze. I know. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was deliberate, like both of us knew that words wouldn't fix what had been broken. But they might begin something else. Not forgiveness, but decency. I didn't come to gloat, I said. I know you didn't, she replied. You never needed to win to feel whole. That was always me. There it was. I took a slow breath. Then, I said the one thing I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. Only this time, I didn't need to rehearse it anymore. You don't need my forgiveness, Elena. That's not why we're here. She looked up, surprised. I'm not asking for anything, she said quietly. I didn't say you were, I replied. But if there's anything left inside you that still wants to hold on to something real, something not built on ambition or fear, then hold on to it. She stared at me like I had just handed her something heavy, invisible, but undeniable. I lied about you because I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid I'd always be the sister who wasn't enough, that they'd choose the colonel over the CEO. I tilted my head. You were never not enough, Elena. You were just looking in the wrong direction. She almost laughed. It cracked mid-throat and became a cough. I ruined your career, she said. No, I corrected gently. You delayed it. There's a difference. She let out a shaky breath. They're going to indict me. Federal charges, probably. I shrugged lightly. Actions have consequences. She nodded. I know. Then, for the first time in what felt like forever, she asked, Do you hate me? I paused. No, I said truthfully. I don't. Her eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in something closer to hope. I don't hate you, Elena, but that doesn't mean we go back to Sunday dinners and pretending nothing happened. It means I refuse to let bitterness be the last chapter. We stood in that hallway a few minutes longer. No tears, no embrace, just a quiet agreement between two women who had been broken by the same storm, but survived it differently. Before we parted, she said one more thing. If I had told the truth earlier, would you have helped me? I looked her in the eye. Yes. Then I turned and walked away, not because I was running, but because I had already landed. And this time, no one was going to take that from me again. The invitation came in a navy blue envelope with gold embossed insignia, clean, crisp, and unmistakably military. It sat on my kitchen counter for a full day before I opened it. I had already guessed what it said. They were offering me a formal return to the Air Force. Not just a reinstatement of my rank and record, but an invitation to serve again, this time as a senior advisor at the elite training program for next-generation combat pilots. My first reaction wasn't joy. It was silence. I stared out the window of my modest home near the base, watching a pair of jets slice through the sky. Young pilots at the stick, probably dreaming of glory, unaware of how politics could clip your wings long before enemy fire ever reached you. I didn't say yes immediately. I needed to understand why I was even hesitating. When I first became a pilot, I flew because it made me feel limitless. The sky felt like home. After the scandal, after the betrayal, I buried that part of me beneath maintenance manuals and stripped bolts. I convinced myself that fixing planes was enough, that grounding myself would keep me safe. But landing that C-17 had awakened something I thought was long dead. Still, I didn't want to go back just to relive the past. I wanted to do something better with it. So I said yes, but with conditions. I wouldn't return to flight combat. I wouldn't wear the wings out of nostalgia. And I wouldn't play politics. What I offered instead was to mentor the next phoenixes who needed someone to believe in them before they even believed in themselves. When I arrived at the base for the formal announcement, I noticed something strange. People stood taller around me. Young officers saluted with respect, not obligation. Some even whispered my name with reverence, not for my rank, but for what I'd done in that cockpit, and what I'd survived outside it. The ceremony was brief, terse even, just the way I liked it. One colonel handed me back my insignia. Another read a citation that ended with the words, "In recognition of exceptional conduct, integrity, and contribution to national defense, both in and out of uniform." Then came the moment I hadn't expected. A young cadet walked up to me after the event, barely 20, hair still regulation tight, boots still shiny. She looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Ma'am, I heard what they did to you, and how you came back. I just want to say, thank you." I nodded, but she kept talking. "My dad said women don't belong in fighter cockpits, but he also watched that footage of you landing that plane. Twice." That made me smile. Later, in my new office, sparse, functional, with a view of the training tarmac, I placed two things on my desk. One was a photo of my old unit. The other was the tag from my maintenance jumpsuit. It reminded me that titles come and go. But character is what remains when you've lost everything else. I didn't return to the Air Force to reclaim my past. I returned to invest in someone else's future. And this time, I wouldn't be flying alone. I'd be lifting others until they could take off without me. That's the kind of flight that never needs to land. The morning air smelled like fuel and salt. I stood on the edge of the runway, clipboard in hand, boots firm against the tarmac, as the next generation of pilots prepared to take off. Their jets lined the strip like sharpened blades. The engines of the F-35s purred at idle, restrained power waiting to be unleashed. I watched one cadet in particular, Callie Ruiz. She was barely 21. Bright, quick, stubborn. Reminded me of someone I used to know. She'd just finished her pre-flight checklist, helmet tucked under one arm, nerves dancing behind her steady eyes. She caught my gaze and nodded. I nodded back. Behind me, instructors talked in hushed tones. Somewhere up the command tower, I knew they were watching me too. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for them. The roar of the jet engine erupted as Callie rolled forward. She picked up speed, wheels spinning, wind tearing past the nose, until in one clean break from gravity, she lifted off. The aircraft glinted in the morning sun, trailing confidence. I didn't smile right away. Not yet. My hands tightened on the clipboard, because I knew what she didn't know yet, what it cost to fly, what it cost to fall, what it took to get back up. As the jet arced into the blue, I finally heard it, that voice again. "Phoenix, bring her home." I didn't flinch this time, didn't mistake it for a memory or a ghost. It was inside me now, not just a call sign, not just a past life, but a truth, a reminder that the fire never really kills the phoenix. It tempers her. I looked down at the nameplate on my jacket. It no longer said maintenance crew. It didn't even say colonel. Just my name. Isla Warren. Flight instructor. Simple, honest. Enough. People ask me sometimes if I regret anything, if I wish I hadn't spoken up all those years ago, if I wish I'd played the politics, stayed quiet, protected the mission by lying. I don't. Because if I had stayed silent, 250 soldiers wouldn't have made it home that day, and I wouldn't have seen my sister, proud, broken, humbled, choose a better path. I wouldn't be standing here, watching these young pilots climb towards something bigger than themselves. Above me, Callie banked hard to the left, then leveled out, textbook. She's a natural, one of the younger instructors said. I said nothing, just watched the sky, wide and open, just breathed. Then, for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, not in pain, not in defiance, but in peace. Phoenix rising. And this time, I smiled. Not because I was back, but because I had never really left. A few weeks after I returned to the base, a small brown package appeared on my desk. No return address, just my name, neatly typed. No card, no message. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue, was a photo. It was from over 20 years ago. Me, still in my flight suit, standing at attention, eyes straight ahead as the president pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross on my uniform. I looked impossibly young. But it wasn't the medal that caught my breath. It was Elena. She was in the corner of the frame, half smiling, clapping, pride shining through every line of her face. We were side by side back then, before promotions and contracts and silence carved a canyon between us. I stared at that photo for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a war had been won or lost. It just felt finished. There was no letter in the package, but then again, there didn't need to be. That picture said everything she couldn't find the words to say. I walked down the quiet hallway of the training wing and unlocked my office door. The room still smelled of jet oil and whiteboard markers, clean, precise, impersonal, but not for long. I framed the photo that afternoon and hung it on the wall just behind my desk, right where every student could see it when they walked in, not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a reminder. That family doesn't always get it right, that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't visible. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing to let something else grow where pain once lived. I never called Elena to say thank you, and she never followed up. But I think he knew, and maybe that's enough. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee resting in your hands? Or maybe it's late at night, and you found comfort in stories like this, stories that whisper instead of shout. Wherever you are, I want to thank you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for believing that redemption is possible, even when the path to it is hard. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that sometimes courage comes softly, dressed in overalls instead of medals, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of a community that still believes in quiet strength, in healing, in second chances, and maybe, just maybe, in the power of a photo sent without a single word. Take care of your heart, keep your sky clear, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door, it waits quietly. Until you're ready to open your heart, we'll see you in the next story.